Hey everyone, thank you for joining. Today I'm speaking with Cody Lazar. Cody is an associate professor of geology at California State University in San Bernardino, and he's one of 270 faculty members in the California State system that signed an open letter supporting academic freedom and calling out, I guess, what's going on in academia in general, but I guess more specifically California State. Hi, Cody. Thank you for coming on.
Thanks for having me.
So yeah, I mentioned this open letter. So I mean, I want to ask what precipitated it, but it's almost like it's everything. That's pretty much blatantly obvious if you even pay the slightest bit of attention. But again, so uh, why did why did you feel that, or why did you and the rest of the faculty feel that like now you really had to do something?
Well, uh, it feels like that it's assumed that everyone's in agreement about certain issues. Like for example, some of the controversial DEI issues. And I guess I shouldn't say people. It's assumed people. It's no one ever voices any criticism of anything. And when I say criticism, I just mean like a back and forth, like just even asking questions about some things, like for example eliminating GRE scores. GRE is the
Yeah.
SAT for graduate school, right?
Mhm.
And but I would have these little mini conversations with people, or I could see looks on people's faces, and I feel like there's something at the university in the current moment is not allowing people to speak up and speak their mind and talk about things, fully in the way that, at least in my opinion, should be happening. And so I had sensed this just in my own experience, and also just knowing what's going on in the world, from Fire and from Heterodox
Mhm.
Academy and all these organizations and Twitter. And so I wanted to. I personally wanted to speak up more, but I didn't know if I could. I didn't know what was going to happen. So I think what we started doing, I started reaching out to people, and try to find people who also felt the same way as I did. And it seemed to me that, you know, and so I think the core of that is the core of what we're doing is trying to organize to get people to encourage people to speak up, and when they think something should be spoken up about. So, um,
I- Um, to be pessimistic about this, like, do you think this is kind of shutting the barn door after the horses have like escaped? I mean, this has been building up. Like you're saying, oh, people are, not wanting to speak their mind, but this has been building up for 20 years now. Yeah.
I think you're correct, and I think, I mean, you're correct to be pessimistic in the sense that, um, there is a very, I mean, if you want to look at it democratically, there's a very strong Democratic majority at the universities, in the administration, and in the faculty, to accept, a lot of some of the core tenets of for example, critical theories, and sort of whatever people are calling postmodernist, type philosophies, and applying them to education. So in that way, I, I think, and when I say a majority of people, I mean, I think there are the scholar activists who are very well, devoted to these kinds of things, and then there's just a vast majority of people who are just fine with it, who maybe they don't, they're just okay with it. They don't really see a problem with it. And so when you combine those two groups of people, it does seem a little pessimistic. On the other hand, what else are we to do, right? We have to try something. And I'm tenured, so at some point, um, I want to raise my hand in a meeting, and I want to say I think that getting rid of GRE scores is a bad idea, and I want someone to defend the idea that you should do that. And as an example, right?
Yeah. Okay.
And
Sorry. Just want to interrupt one quick. Like, I don't, I applaud any of these efforts that are happening because I know, like in Boston, I think at Harvard, Steven Pinker was leading something there as well along these lines, and you know, Now, I applaud all this. I'm just, and I'm not saying don't do it or anything. It's just, I was just like, in my mind, it's almost at the point of no return, if not past. Like it's just, it's just so far gone, like from what I see. And I'm an outsider looking in, so that's
Well, let me give you an example of like something that First of all, I want to mention that I have never personally. I'm a geology professor, right? So
yeah,
I'm not in sociology or any place that has a lot of scholar activism. Um, Although that's changing a little bit in the sciences, which we can talk about later if you want. But I've never really personally had an interaction with an activist on a specific issue. Mostly, my colleagues are very cool. I like them all. I think they like me. All everything's very positive. And so I do want to sort of I want to preface that when I'm of this example I'm about to give you of a situation that it's not, nothing hostile is happening. So I think if there's one reason to not be pessimistic is that in my personal experience with this, at least in the science department, no one has screamed at me yet, right? So, and I'm not very confrontational about any of this either. So, but I'll just give you an example of one thing that happened. Going back to the GRE issue, we had the our DEI board wanted us to get rid of the GRE entrance requirement at our university for equity reasons, and the first time that was introduced, the director of our graduate program said exactly that. The DEI board wants us to get rid of it, and so let's do it. And there was really no discussion. This is people just kind of It was just kind of what I interpreted to be an awkward pause because no one wanted to go against the DEI board, or they agreed with it, or they just didn't care, right? And so what happened was we got rid of the GRE requirement for our master's program, and then a year later, and this was before I had started helping to organize people to get our thoughts together on this. A year later, I was like, I'm sorry, I can't live with this. I think this is a bad idea. So I emailed the department and I said, no, I emailed other faculty and I said, at our next meeting, I think I think this was a mistake to get rid of this. And I'd like to have a vote to not get rid of the GRE requirement. And, and they were like, okay, let's do it. And so next time we came back, we had a discussion. I said what was on my mind. I said, this is a bad idea. We had a vote. It ended up being 7-2, 7 people voting against getting rid of the GRE requirement. And we came to a compromise where it became optional, which I think is pretty fashionable now. But the point is I challenged the idea coming from the DEI board. We had a really nice discussion. Nobody yelled at anybody, and it was fine. And I think that might seem trivial to some people listening in. If you're a professor, maybe that might help professors find voices, especially if they're tenured. But it went okay, you know what I mean? And it wasn't. And I was fine with the outcome. And these little things like that, I think. Those are reasons for me to be optimistic that I'm going to speak my mind the next time. I might not win every time, but I'm at least going to say something. And I think that with a 7-2 vote, I think most people are pretty moderate, even at the university where I think there's a perception, and I think this is real, that most people are on the political left who are going to be more likely to be sympathetic to some of the doctrines of the scholar activists. I think even in that situation, I think people are willing to talk about things and be moderate if given the opportunity.
okay. On something like that, so like, okay, STEM is still a little insulated, but it's getting bad, and we can talk about that because I mean, there's some stuff happening in Montreal it's pretty ridiculous, and that's happening in chemistry and physics as well. So now, but at the same point, like STEM was maybe the last bastion of reason left in the academy. Like, I mean, I'm sorry, the humanities, as far as I'm concerned, there's just no point. Like, I wouldn't send anyone to get a humanities degree. I don't think you're going to get anything of any value. You might have one course out of your whole undergraduate study that you have a decent prof who teaches you something. The rest of it, I think, is just going to be ideological mind-numbing garbage. And then, this is someone I went through a poli-sci degree, so I saw some of the postmodernism and some of the post-colonialism, like in the early '90s. I saw some of that in my courses, but it was very minuscule, right? So like now, I hate to see what a poli-sci course is like. Um, but my thing with the STEM is this is where I see the big failure of the universities or academia in general. You gave PhDs such value, and I'm not trying to denigrate PhDs. I'm trying to denigrate people who get doctorates. You have to do a lot of work. I understand it, but someone like Kendi getting a PhD, that demeans all PhDs. And what I'm saying is, like, so when you mentioned, okay, the DEI board came to the geology department and said, okay, we have to get rid of the GRE. Now you're respecting the DEI board because that's a doctorate in sociology, focusing on African American studies or whatever, like something like along those lines. Or now University of Chicago, I think, is already put in or is going to be putting in a chair of CRT or something like that. So you're giving the respect to that PhD and saying, okay, we're geologists. That's someone who studies that. They have so we can't argue with them on that. And I think that was a cop out. And I think that was, I'm all for academic freedom. I'm all for, but there's also the rigor. Like, I don't think the rigor was applied to any of this. Because I'm sorry, on the face of it, if you read anything that comes out of the Kendi D'Angelo version of anti-racism, like where a lot of this DEI stuff comes from, it's nonsense. And there was nothing applied to it. So like that's one of my big things with academics and academia in general. It's like, you allowed this nonsense to happen. I mean, people like Randall Kennedy were speaking out against CRT in the early '90s, and they were pretty much ignored. There was, a few others. There were, Jonathan Rauch's book, Kindly Inquisitors, talking about what was going on in universities in like the late '80s, early '90s. It was allowed to fester and go on. Like, it just, people buried their heads in the sands. Oh, they have PhDs, so they must know what they're talking about. That's what gets me. It's like, yeah, STEM is safe now, but what happens when the crop of students coming out get social justice math, and maybe they're going to get social justice biology and whatever, and they're going through university? What happens at that point? Like, it's no longer just coming from administration, it's coming from within the faculty.
You really hit the nail on the head, which is the central problem that's going on right now. And I can't wait for the opportunity to talk about this with my colleagues, because I think I understand this now from reading, from listening, many podcasts, including your own. There is a conflict right now at the universities between the actual purpose and mission of the university. Do we create knowledge and beauty, because let's not forget the arts, using the time-honored, well-tested principles of the Enlightenment? Or is the purpose of the university to be an instrument for social activism, for scholar activism? And this, to me, is something I did not understand until starting to get more steeped into this. The PhDs you're talking about, the Kendis of the world, they're coming from a scholar perspective, a perspective of scholarship that regards activism as the primary goal of what they're doing. And this sounded batshit crazy to me, to be honest, until I started actually seeing it in print. There's a really great book called The Critical Turn in Education. And the guy's Isaac Gottsman, I think is his name. And it's basically, the subtitle is, it's something, I'm paraphrasing, the critical scholarship and education from Marx to postmodernism to modern times, or something like that. And this is not a James Lindsay Helen Pluckrose publication. This is the real deal. This is a guy who is one of these professors you're talking about, who has a PhD, who writes books that appear scholarly. But when you read it, in the very first paragraph, he talks about the need for radical social change, and how is our scholarship helping radical social change? And that right there sums it up for me, which is that we have people getting PhDs who are not interested in the old, quote, the old antiquated way of assuming there's a reality and trying to find out about it through the scientific method or through enlightenment based scholarship. And instead, they want to use the university. They want to use scholarship to advance a particular social justice agenda. Now, I mean, they're free to do that, I suppose. I mean, I'm not saying they shouldn't do that, but I am here to say that I think it's a bad idea for the university. I think you would agree with that.
Oh yeah, totally. I mean, again, like, you know, I if you listen to this, like, I was away. I came back in 2014, and when I saw this craziness, around then, like, I just started joking around because I'm like, left, right, liberal, conservative just have lost all meaning. They're valueless terms now. I just joking around like, yeah, I'm an enlightenmentarian. I support the values of the Enlightenment, and put me wherever you want in your goddamn political spectrum.
That's right.
This is what I'm supposed to support now. And one of the first things I said was, you're going to get overcorrections. I saw what was going on. I said, you're going to get overcorrections. And there were other people, like, I'm a nobody. I was, like at that point, I didn't even have the small following I had. Now I like, I was not someone who spoke up or anything like that, but I saw it and I'm like, this is wrong. And you're going to get the overcorrection. So now when I see people freaking out about, okay, so just recently, the quote unquote book banning, right? I'm like, first of all, these aren't banned books per se. They're taken out of curriculum, and that's parents and teachers and whatever deciding what's in the curriculum. But 2 years ago or 3 years ago, when California took out 1984 and To Kill a Mockingbird, and I'm trying to think of a few others out of their curriculum, there was no outcry. There was no, oh my God, they're banning these books, they're taking them out. In 2018, there was a bunch of teachers that were taking out, granted, some of these were old textbooks that were going to be disposed of anyways, but they were taking out others that they said, okay, they weren't out of date. They were just didn't fit the new, DEI worldview, and they were being taken out, and some of them were being burned in a dumpster. Again, they're like AP and New York Times, whatever, were defending these teachers. Now, when parents, we can talk about the overcorrections that are happening there as well. Like, I believe in Texas, they took out cynical theories, like the James Lindsay Helen Plucker's books. So they said, oh no, this talks about CRT, you can't teach it. And I'm like, if you want to fight CRT, that might be a good book to have, but whatever, but I'm sorry, but gender queer does not belong in, it certainly doesn't belong in elementary school. I'd argue whether it belongs in high schools or not either. And so there was someone who just put out and just because it just someone put out this report, and they did a study of all the books that are being banned, and I think it's, I don't like using the term ban, but whatever, it's 1% of districts and 265 of the 5,000 books that were being taken out of the curriculum or moved. Like Angela Gorman's poem, like, book of poetry was moved from, to middle school or something like that. It wasn't even taken out of the library. They all had sexual and pornographic content. I mean, the others could be, there was a book I read about in 2020. It was being taught in kindergartens in Illinois, and then it started spreading to other parts of the country. It's called Not My Idea. There's a page in that book, and it's a contract to sell your soul, and it's a whiteness, like accepting whiteness is signing a contract to sell your soul. And they were teaching this to kindergarten kids. Now, I'm sorry, but that's not appropriate whatsoever, and that should not be in our curriculum. This is not censorship, whatever. You want to go buy that book and give it to your kids, fill your boots. But it shouldn't be taught in public schools. Like, and if the majority of the parents and teachers think it should, then you should have the right to pull your kids out of that school, because that's, I'm thinking that's insane. So that's my thing with this. It's just like, you're going to start getting these overcorrections now, and people are freaking out about this. But the left did this. The left opened up, and I'm using that term broadly, but or the woke left opened up this hole where anyone who wants now. I mean, I keep thinking back to Hitchens. He used to talk about A Man for All Seasons. And he's talking about Roper, who, he said, I'll burn down every single law in England to catch the devil. And then Thomas More turns around, like, goes, what are you going to do when the devil turns around to face you? Like, you've got no laws to protect yourself. And I'm like, you've worn away, like, again, I'm not, when I say you, but like, the woke left has destroyed civil liberties. Like, the ACLU is useless. In Canada, we're much worse off than you are in the States. but yeah,
No First Amendment.
no First Amendment.
Yeah.
No protection of truth, protection, of expression. Uh, we've got a petty dictator wannabe in Trudeau. It's just unbelievable. But yeah, I mean, like that's what I'm saying is like when I see some of these things happening now and people are freaking out, I'm like, why weren't you freak like these alarm bells should have been rung in 2013 and 2014. Like ringing them now because the right's doing it. For me, it's like I'm sorry. For some people, I have absolutely no pity. Like I saw Crenshaw complaining about how civil liberties were gone. I'm like, your paper in 1991 mapping the margins, you said straight out you wanted to get rid of the liberal
Yeah.
ethic, and now you're complaining about it. Like, no,
Right.
I have no sympathy for her, none whatsoever. Like other people, yeah, I do have some sympathy for her because yeah, you tried her, but it's just like I'm being very you know down on this, but it just maybe I spent too much time looking into it. I'm like, there's so much that needs to be fixed. It's it's scary.
Well, I agree, and I'm concerned about overcorrections as well. In our group, we have we have mixed opinions about, for example, the Stop Woke Act in Florida. I think Fire is correct on this, that saying what someone can and can't say in the classroom at the college level is a little problematic. And the Stop Woke Act actually says certain things you can't say in the class, and I don't know if that's the right way to do it. I think at its core, though, I think you going back to your point about it seems like it's gotten out of hand. I think the reason for that again goes back to what you're saying about these PhDs that are coming out. I think people have been just confused. I was genuinely confused because yes, people with PhDs would come out and say these things. Um, for example, the classic Ibram Kendi line, that the only that if there's a I'm paraphrasing any difference in outcomes between two different groups is evidence for racism, right? But he has a PhD. He's distinguished. He gets a lot of invitations. He has famous books. I read his book. There's some interesting things in there, I'll be honest. But the overarching concept that he's trying to promote is non-scientific. It's just an assumption. The way a scientist would approach that, and I think people need to understand that, and they need to understand how to criticize how to criticize an idea as a scientist would. So the essence of science is in fact you said you read Kindly Inquisitors, right? So which is a wonderful book. And Rausch makes the point, and he's a journalist, but it's the same kind of thing, that the business of knowledge production, in essence, it's the business of criticizing and doubting something. And the only way you can do that is by speaking up and saying what's on your mind. And you propose an idea, and then I go check it. And that's really all science really is, in a way. It's just people proposing an idea and everybody else criticizing it. And the ideas that are able to withstand this process of criticism are the ones that we accept as probably correct, like the theory of evolution, right? The theory of, in my field, the theory of plate tectonics. The reason we accept these things is because no one's figured out a good enough way to criticize them, right? They seem to stand up to all the criticism. And so the way to interact with a DEI board would be, when they say we want this, then what you do is you say, okay, can you show me some evidence that supports some literature that supports what you want to do? Now, maybe they provide it. If they don't, then a scientist, a true scholar, would be like, we're done here, because if you can't provide any backup for what you're saying, I'm not really sure we're supposed to do it, unless they're ideologically biased or something.
Yeah.
But maybe they do provide something. And this is where it gets interesting, because I've seen some of these papers, and I think you've seen some of the papers, the original, and the papers. When you read some of the papers that are designed to back up what people are saying, what the things that are called research, social justice research, they are all operating under a series of assumptions, and they're not operating under enlightenment based principles of scholarship, and so that's where it starts to get interesting. And I think if people understood that, they could interact in more productive ways, at least especially at the university level.
Yeah, I think it was, I can't remember if it was Peter Boghossian or Brett Weinstein who called it, you know, uh, was it knowledge laundering or ideal,
Yes.
you know. And I mean, yeah, that's exactly what it is. Like you're bringing in these things so someone can point to this paper. I mean, you know, like I did a deep dive into all this stuff, and I mean, some of the papers I was looking for again because I wanted to show them to people because they were so nuts. But I remember reading one that said uh, that the slaves that were brought over from Africa, because their labor helped the white colonizers wipe out the, you know, indigenous tribes in the United States, the slaves were partially responsible for the genocide of the indigenous tribes. Now, that's nuts. And I mean, I don't know who that helps. I don't know what that's supposed to do, but blaming slaves for the slaughter of the indigenous tribes, I mean, like all that I can see that doing is creating racial divisions. And you know, like in my mind, if I was David Duke, I would write that to create divisions between, you know, black people and natives. Like that, that's the only thing I can see that doing. Um, but yeah, it's again, I'm still trying to wrap my head around. I understand how the administration grew, and like, you know, I really like read a lot of stuff about this, but at one point, I mean, again, that's maybe it just got too big and it's too hard to handle. But shouldn't that be part of the deal with universities? Is you're actually auditing your department and making sure they're coming out with good scholarship? Like, you know,
Well,
if
yeah, that's an excellent point, and let me tell you structurally the problem with that, which is that at my first of all, at my university, California State University, San Bernardino, I think it's like most universities, which is that most of the tenure decisions go through the department primarily. Each department writes its own criteria for tenure. The university may have some criteria for tenure as well, but the departments are pretty much in control of what goes on. I think it's not common for someone above a department level, say a dean or a provost or at the college level, to deny someone tenure for scholarship. That's at least that I think that's going to be true for most universities. So the problem, you know, if you, I think we agree that there is a problem of scholarship in some departments, it becomes a self-perpetuating engine of activism, because you get a majority of once you get a majority of faculty in a department that believes that scholarship is defined by your activism, then those activists are going to continue to get tenured, and the department becomes a department of activism.
do you think? I mean, I was speaking to a couple of professors, but one, I mean, who's also in California, Jake Mackey. I asked him
Yeah.
this as well. I said, at this point, what I see needing to happen is, okay, so go back to the Stop Woke Act. I think if the Stop Woke Act had stopped with just the DEI administration or the administration in general, and not did anything with the faculty or what's being taught in classrooms, I think it would have been a much better piece of legislation. Like, prove what you're doing. Like, you know, if you're going out like the DEI, so personally, I think it's going to have to be faculty standing up and going to, um, you know, like the deans and the president and, you know, like all the higher, I don't know if that's administration or whatever in the university, and saying these boards are curtailing our freedom. And like, it's either, you know, stick with them or you're going to lose us. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
yes, for all of you, you're risking your job, but I don't see any university wanting to lose, let's say, 60% of their, you know, their professors. I don't think any university could survive that, right? Like, it's so either revamp your administration or let us do what we're going to do. But like I don't see, I without that critical mass of teachers and professors, I don't see reasonable pushback that's going to work without legislation. Then, like, I don't think if the faculty
I,
doesn't do it, I
I
think the state is going to have to step in.
That's right. And the state, California is not going to step in. Other states will. And I'm going to be very curious to see what happens in the so-called red states, for example, where there's a political will to, return universities to, enlightenment-based scholarship. And I think I'm just curious to see what will happen. I can't see that. But on the other hand, I really think that one of the, going back to the structure of the political structure, the political reality of university is that most people at the university are on the political left. That's frankly that used to be what made universities fun for me, because it's people doing weird stuff, and that's fun, and that's what makes college towns really cool. But I think it's gotten a little bit out of control right now, and I think that going back to explaining all this as this problem of scholarship will bring a lot of people on the political left to understand what's going on. Like, for example, if you come up with a Kendiism, I think most scientists, anyways, at least in the science, I don't know what we do about sociology departments or English departments or anything, but at least in the sciences, I think that if we make the point that that explaining any difference between two outcomes as assuming it's due to one vague concept, just explaining that's just bad science, I think people will understand that. I think that's because I think the people on the political left, they traditionally have prided themselves on being the pro science side of the political spectrum, so to speak. Right? Science is real, right?
Yeah.
I think that's part of, and I think that is, I think that's historically been true, because I think that comes from the fact that people on the left tend to be more secular. They perceive people on the right to be more religious and irrational. And so to be on the left is to be in favor of science. So I think if we can sort of lean into that, then I think we can start to bring people over to at least be sympathetic to the idea that DEI should be criticized, not just by whispers in a hallway, but in departmental meetings, in college level meetings, and in reviews and things like that. I think that's one pathway forward.
But okay, the STEM thing, like I talk about this now, but what you were just saying, like we have to follow, like let's be scientific about this, and that's one of the things. Okay, especially during the whole COVID thing. Like, I'm not going to get in. Like I'm not going to start. I took the vaccines, whatever. Like I'm not, but there was a lot of bullshit during COVID, and the answer always was follow the science. And Fauci on 60 Minutes, I am the science. Like no, bullshit. Right. Okay, follow the scientific method. Like that should have been the mantra, not follow the science.
Correct. That is correct.
That's one
very excellent point.
But when you have biology departments now that are actively, pushing gender and queer ideology, and you have biology departments questioning what it is to be male and female, which is happening.
Yes.
What are you going to do when intelligent design rears its ugly head again? Right? When I was mentioning Montreal, what happened there. So at McGill and at Concordia. So at McGill, a friend of mine, he's a chemistry professor. He was putting in for a funding for a research project. He got denied because his hiring wasn't going to be diverse enough, because he was doing it on merit, not on DEI initiatives. And he's from, Pat is Indian. He's from South Asia. And he was told he's being racist and white supremacist. Concordia is teaching in their physics department, the racism of white light. So, I mean, it's, this is, it isn't STEM. I mean, I saw something for archaeology, which, I mean, I don't know where that falls under science or social science or whatever, but, and this was a few years ago, and I brought it up with some friends, and they're like, oh, what are you talking about? This is silly. And now I see it in few more places where we shouldn't assume the gender of the bodies that we find, because, we don't know how they identify. And I'm sorry, but if you find a male skeleton, I think you're safe to assume that was a male. And, it doesn't, it's archaeology shouldn't be focusing on that. So it's like I said, STEM was the last bastion, but it's creeping in through the back door. It's coming in through the funding. It's coming in through, like I said, okay, how are you going to hire people? So again, it's a war of attrition. If you've turned K through 12 is turning into woke madrasas, and eventually the universities are going to be woke seminaries. And it's they just have to wait for Gen X to die out, pretty much. I mean, that's like, I don't,
And the boomers, yeah,
uh,
there's some
uh,
the younger boomers and
yeah. But I mean, like that's what I mean. Like it's in STEM. Like how when you're talking about, okay, it's the politicization or whatever. But I'm just like, I, I at this point, I still want to see either a really big pushback coming from a lot of places all at once, or just say, what, burn it to the ground, and we're going to start up things like the University of Austin, or like, what was the other one, the
mhm,
Ralston Academy, and things like that.
right,
You
right.
know, because I think there is enough professors like you who are fed up with this, that if you did branch out, and I think there would be a market for it, but again, I'm from the outside looking in.
Well, I think there definitely would be a market for it, and I think um, you know, I think the solution is multi-pronged effort. I think having the new institutions is going to be important. I
Mm.
think reforming reforming institutions where there's political will to do it. I think there's some ham-fisted attempts to do that right now, but in the end, I think people will start to get it right. Um, there's other external reforms, like, for example, why are we sending so many kids to college in the first place? Why are these
Yeah.
places so powerful, right? Now, maybe that's easy for me to say as a tenured professor. The assistant professor who or the adjunct or the part timer may be mad, but we probably need fewer universities, in the sense that why do you need a college degree to become a police officer, to become a CPA? I mean, seriously,
There's a lot of
I
things
don't,
like
most things, right? Like, maybe, I think as the public starts to perceive universities, I got have you had Amna Khalid on? You know who she is? She's
uh
written a lot of. She's a part of Academic Freedom Alliance. She's going to speak to our group in a little bit. She's really good, and she's a very passionate defender of academic freedom. And she really is very. She's critical of DEI, and she's critical of a lot of stuff DeSantis is doing and red
yeah.
state stuff. Um, and she points out Stop Woke Act is against academic freedom. She wants reforms to come from professors. I agree with her in theory. I tend to be more aligned with you that there's going to need to be some external legislative solutions to this where it's politically feasible. And I think the reason for that is we can sit around and wait for it to happen within, but at some point, the voters in particularly red states are just going to be fed up. They're going to be like, why am I sending my kid to these universities, and they're getting these what looks like a psychology degree, but actually they're learning political ideologies as fact. And I think, and then why am I hiring this kid with a college degree when the degree is just an indication that they're going to bring political activism to my company as opposed to performing a job? So I think if the universities don't get their act together, there will be some political consequences for that. And in the next, even it could even be sooner than we think, because I think there'll be a place like Oklahoma. I could see if there was a referendum to, close all the departments at the university, defund every department at the University of Oklahoma except engineering and STEM, and maybe I don't know, a few others. That would probably pass.
Yeah. Okay.
So universities they really need to. There's an echo chamber or bubble problem at the universities, and they really need. I hope that universities would appreciate having dissident professors among their ranks to help point out where there's going to be some problems, because if they don't pay attention to this, there's some, again, in California probably not going to be an issue, but in some of the other states there's going to be some problems.
Okay. This, like, not everyone has to go to university. Yes, I agree with that. There should be more put on trades. There should be more, even like some of the IT stuff. Like, I work in IT, uh, to administer computer networks, or looking after like the physical, like the routing and the switching and the servers and all that. You can take a 1 year course, and then you can start working. You don't have to go in debt. You don't need a computer science course and all this stuff. Like, yeah, all this credentialism is getting out of hand. Like, oh yeah, you're going to do data entry at a government, for a government municipal government or whatever. It's a yeah, you need a bachelor's degree for that. No, you don't. You're just doing data entry. But you yeah, like I mean, I joked around in the early 2000s. I was like, yeah, you don't need university anymore. I said, unless you're going to become a doctor or an engineer. Like I was saying things like that. Uh, if it's an arts degree, just read some books. I mean, it's but they have to be careful. Like I think we got to stop, or at least maybe that should come from universities as well. Like just saying, let's stop giving out frivolous degrees. I mean, with the frivolous degrees, the student loan problem. I understand it's not all universities, but like the Ivies. I don't know about the Pac-10 schools, or the schools like Northwestern, whatever. They have huge endowments. I'm
Mm-hmm.
sorry, if you gave someone a degree in gender studies, or they've got a PhD in queer theory, the university ripped them off. The university robbed them of an education. The university, that's my belief. Like you defrauded so many kids. I think a generation of children, or young adults, whatever you want to call them, like university students, had their education stolen. They were ripped off by these universities for teaching them absolute nonsense, and for not teaching them how to think, for actually re-educating them. Maybe they learned how to think in high school and they were re-educated out of how to think. Any critical thinking was beat out of them. I That's my belief. Like, okay, yeah, fine. You went to medical school, you went to engineering, you went to these things, you got a high student debt, but at least you're making decent money. But you know, you got a sociology degree and you're focused on post-colonialism or something like that. Like, I'm sorry, you're not fit for purpose except to go back to university and teach that nonsense to other people.
Yeah, I mean, they again, I don't want to be too confrontational.
Yeah,
I want people to feel free to get a gender studies degree if that's what they want to do. But I want people to feel free to ridicule it.
yeah.
I want people to feel free to oppose funding it. This is it's very complicated. The, what people choose to study. I study geology. People, why are we why are we paying this guy to teach people how to identify rocks? I could see people saying that. I think that, again, the solution from a rhetorical standpoint is to help people understand that when somebody gets a degree in gender studies, they are getting a degree in radical social change. They're not getting a degree in enlightenment based scholarship. And I think that's I think if you put it like that, it's my theory. I don't know. I hope that if you put it like that, that people sort of understand. Like I'm, I think I've, I haven't read Judith Butler yet. I don't think I want to. I hear it's
No,
really hard to read.
trust me, you don't want to read as
But
bad
but I've read.
as bad as CRT is. Just going to interject. I don't know how much CRT you've read, but as bad as CRT and intersectionality is,
I haven't.
gender studies is far worse. Judith Butler and Gail Rubin are just it's just insane rambling. Sorry.
Yeah, I just I've read some of the popular, like I read Kendi's book. I read White Fragility, that's the book that actually radicalized me to go down the rabbit hole, because that one that I can I can explain. There's a little story on that. I can tell you that in a little if you're interested, because it encapsulates the whole issue. Um, but I read these books, and I think I remember reading somewhere somebody wrote an op-ed about social justice, and yeah, maybe it gets out of hand, but it does. There's a kernel of truth. There are kernels of truth in there, and one of the most important things it teaches, if you want to take a moderate view of it, which is something good, which is that it just encourages people to listen a little more. It doesn't mean I'm going to agree with stuff, but maybe I could take if someone, if I have a friend over and they want to talk about George Floyd, and maybe I'll listen a little more deeply to what they're going to say. I don't mind that. That's just good interaction with humans, But of course, obviously, there's I'm trying to be I'm trying to be as generous as
Yeah.
possible. I don't want it, because I don't want, again, I don't want to I'm not trying to be pugnacious about any of this really, except to the extent that when radical social change becomes the modus operandi for the university, I think that's the end of the university. I will die on that hill, for sure.
Yeah, I mean, you can have an open chain, exchange of ideas. You can't. There's no learning to be had. I mean, I've used this example and I talk about it, and it's so the golden age of Islam, you know, went on from about, I think it was like 850 to like 1100, 1150 or 1200, something like that, like roughly in that time. Um, it was after the Mongols sacked Baghdad that it ended. But about 100 years before that happened, you had this guy Al Ghazali, and Al Ghazali had the year of the Caliph, um, and he was a Sufi, and I mean the whole central point of the Sufism is everything you do is done for the praise and glory of Allah and Islam. Okay. Right now, Sufism is kind of, it's mysticism and stuff, but Al Ghazali had a very, very vaunted position. He was given the title, the Proof of Islam. Like what was written about him is like his writing was so good that if you lost the Quran and the Hadith, you could almost rebuild the entirety of Islam just with by Al Ghazali's writings. So that's how revered he was. But he wrote this book called The Incoherence of the Philosophers, and he said we don't need any more maths. We don't need any more philosophies. We have enough to build things. We have enough for engineering. We don't need any more new thought. It should all be done to glorify Allah and God. Now, this happened, I said, roughly about 100 years before the Mongols sacked Baghdad. So his thinking started getting spread about, the caliphate, right? So Iran, Middle East, North Africa, that whole region. And then there were other thinkers at that point that were revered in the West, like Averroes and Avicenna, and there were a few others, like a few that I've read, like Ibn Khaldun, and trying to think of some others. And they actually, I think it was Avicenna or Averroes, wrote a refutation of the incoherence of the philosophers. They call it the incoherence of the incoherence. Their writings were banned in the caliphate. They were expelled. So my whole thing with this is you cut off that the sense of inquiry. You cut off free inquiry. I mean, Hitchens put it best in his book. He said, faith is helping to choke free inquiry and the emancipating consequences that it might bring. And that's exactly what happened, because over the 1,000 years, there were little pockets here and there where Islam brought about some nice things, but it didn't actually innovate. It just kept redoing the same arches, the same geometry, the same whatever. But they built some nice stuff in Spain. I'm not discounting that, but there was no new real innovation because they stopped at that. But you look at Muslim majority countries now. There's no advancement. I mean, what, you have one Muslim who won a Nobel Prize in science, and if you based on population size, I mean, it's kind of ridiculous. So if you do that here, you're you're going to get rid of even the ability to ask the questions that are needed to advance science or to advance human flourishing. Like, it's, again, maybe I'm really pessimistic. I'll think of like David Deutsch's book, Beginning of Infinity, and he talks about pockets of enlightenment. And I'm like, I don't want 1,000 years from now another Deutsch writing about us as a pocket of enlightenment that got extinguished. And frankly, we're doing it to ourselves. Like it's ridiculous.
Yeah, it's that's an interesting analogy. I about sort of the religious analogy, and I know John McWhorter made this point about the political activism, that it is a religion, um, and um, but the faith that's involved in it, um, again, from a scientific perspective, all that means is that people are just accepting a set of underlying assumptions, right? If you're a Christian, you accept the underlying assumption that God created the world and Jesus died for your sins. If you're an intelligent designer, you accept the assumption that some intelligent being designed the world, right? If you're interested in radical social change and you're a scholar activist, you accept the assumption that our society is divided into oppressor and oppressed classes, um, and that are defined by various identity groups. And all of your scholarship goes points back to that North Star, right? And so I think as professors, we need to remember that there's only one underlying assumption to the Enlightenment. Well, I might, I'm, true philosophers may quibble with me, but as far as a scientist is concerned, the underlying assumption is that there is a reality out there, and it's possible to try to move towards it through the process of the scientific method of free
Yeah.
inquiry, open debate. And that's the only assumption. And that should be the goal of the university. You know, one thing I feel like I've learned from postmodernists, I think this is correct. The that you know Political agendas are basically based on who has the power, right?
Yeah.
I think there's a point to that, right? And so what they would say is like here's a problem with the critique of social justice at the university right now, which I think is a good point. Someone like me, a dissident might come up and say, we need to get politics out of the university, right? And an activist might say, politics have always been in the university. We're just trying to change the politics, right? The politics used to be, evidence, logic, reason, rationality. That's what we accept. But we want to accept a different thing. We want to accept social justice. We want to accept, compassion as we define it or whatever. We want to accept driving towards a utopia. And so I think to address that, all you have to do is just say, instead of saying we want politics out of the university, I think what professors need to start doing is standing up and saying, we want the central agenda of this university to be the pursuit of knowledge and beauty through the processes of the Enlightenment, through logic, reason, rationality, etc. And I think if you say that out loud, and that's so weird about it, Obaid, is that to say that out loud, it's just crazy. This is what is so mind numbing to me, because you're right. How did we get here? Seriously. Like, I think the administration, I think universities really, I think the fact that we have to say this is shameful, that we have to
Yeah.
say this at the universities.
Yeah. Like, just one thing you were talking about, like the social justice, the critical social justice, or the grievance scholarship, whatever. I kind of described it as like the bizarro Ezekiel story. So, Ezekiel pulls back the veil and he sees paradise. Like, it's whatever. It's the book of Ezekiel in the Bible. He pulls back, or it might be an Acts. I can't remember. But anyways, he pulls back the veil and he sees, and there's that painting of him, of Ezekiel pulling back the veil and he's kind of sticking his head through. And he sees paradise in the background. I'm like, these guys are pulling back the veil, and instead of seeing paradise, they're seeing oppression and hell, and like, so it's like a bizarro Ezekiel story. I mean, it's not that I give credence to either one, but there's people saying, oh well, you're siding with this guy and he's a Christian, and you're not, you're an atheist or whatever. I'm like, yeah, but I might disagree with the reality that Christian has, but at least he agrees that there's a reality that we can all share. Like,
Right.
we're starting off from that point that, at least there's like that little foundation that's the same. We can quibble about whether or not which reality is true, but I'd
Right.
rather side with someone who believes that there is an objective reality than side with someone who just thinks reality is whatever you make it.
Yeah.
I'd like to think the moon is still there, even though I'm not seeing it.
Right. Right. Yeah. And this goes back to, I remember, I'll say it, I'll admit it. I'm a fan of Jordan Peterson. I know it's controversial to say that in some crowds, but I like a lot of things that he said. And when somebody asked him once, do you believe in God? And he sort of, I think his answer is something like, I'm agnostic on it, but I act as though I do. Right. And I think about that in terms of science and reality. Right. So maybe the postmodernists are correct. Maybe there is no reality. It's just oppression or whatever. I don't know. But I think for science to function, you have to act as if there is, at least act like there is a reality, right?
Yeah.
So, let the philosophers quibble over whether or not the reality exists or not. But geology as a science, chemistry, physics, any kind of scholarly inquiry cannot function if we don't just assume there is a reality. Just assume it, right? Maybe it's not. Maybe I just watched The Matrix with my daughter the other night, which that the documentary The Matrix, and which is just a fun way to. It's just a fun movie, of course, but the idea that maybe we're living in a simulation, maybe we are, but scientists can't act as if we are. We just have to move forward and just do our stuff and look at our rocks and analyze our black holes, and let's just get on with it.
Yeah. I mean, okay, if we are living in a simulation, I mean, you know, even if it crashes and they got to reboot, like we're never going to know. So yeah, like like I just so yeah, like I said, might as well go through. But that's again, I want to be conscious of time. I don't want to keep you too long, but I'm worried about that. Like I'm worried about okay, I don't have kids. I don't have kids in the school system. I don't have anything like that. But whatever, I'm in my 50s. 10 years from now when I retire, I want to make sure that the people managing my pensions know what the hell they're talking about. They're not saying 2 + 2 = 5. I want my medical system not to assign me doctors based on the color of my skin, but based on like, who's qualified. Um, it's things like this. Like, so I'm being kind of selfish in this, but at the same point too, yes, I don't want to live in a society where like I'll give you some of my fears and I'll let you know. I'll give you the chance to see, let me know what you think and if there's going to be a pushback. But some of the, I see some people say, oh, look at these Gen Zs. They were, they're not going along with this gender stuff. But then there's another study that comes out where 65% of Gen Zs would rather have cameras in the home to make sure that everyone's observed. There was another study out recently, and it was again, I was thinking it was like 20-year-olds. 56% of Republicans believe that professors who say things that are offensive should be fired, and it was something like 80% of Democrats. I don't like, even if this social justice, like those woke stuff goes away, you've got a generation that's got a very authoritarian mindset. I
Mm-hmm.
don't want to see the society they're building. Like it. I'll add on to that. Like I said, even if this woke stuff goes away, like I find that there's been so much capitulation, not even like capitulation, but just at the end of the PC era, like late 90s, early, late 80s, early 90s. Oh, see, it was just some silly college stuff. It's gone away. No, it went underground. I
Mm-hmm.
know when the CDC came out with recommendations that we should maybe give out the COVID vaccine by race instead of by age, and there was outcry, rightfully so. And then 2 days later, they pulled that recommendation. Everyone's like, "See, it's no big deal." They pulled it. 2 years later, you've got medical schools requiring DEI statements over and
Mm-hmm.
above, the the Hippocratic Oath. So people give up too easy. Like I just, there was an article in Wall Street Journal. Oh yeah, so many companies have gotten rid of DEI or officers. Oh yay, we're winning. I'm like, no, you're not. Like it's just going to morph. Like like I'm worried about, like I said, that new generation that's thinking authoritarianly, and then some on the there who are opposed to the woke stuff. I don't want to even say anti-woke side, but like some who are opposed to the woke stuff just give up too easy. Oh, it reminds me of George Bush Jr. going to Iraq saying, "Yeah, mission accomplished." Like
Right. Right.
it's like you're way too early to say you're winning. Or oh, the New York Times wrote a really good article. See, they're pushing back on woke. Like no, they're not. Like they wrote one article out of 100.
Mm-hmm.
you know.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, so yeah, I mean, I don't know if you want to have any thoughts on that, or like if you want to talk about more about how you could push back against this stuff, like or anything you want. Go ahead.
Well, I mean, one thing I've learned to do is to sort of, um, you go to the internet has all these signals of what's happening, and I've learned to just be skeptical of just everything. All I feel like everything has an agenda behind it. What I can say is that, and I think in some ways, I know this is going to sound, um, despite all my opinions about these things and the letter that I've been involved in this organization, I think things on the ground are not as dire as people think they are. I think people are generally cool. Most faculty members are pretty rational. I think people are just going along with things. I think there's a lot of faculty members who go along with things just because they perceive it to be as something they're politically aligned with. I think a lot of the students, there's a lot more variability in student opinions, that at least where I am. So that may not be true at like a Wellesley or a Swarthmore or Harvard or anything, but I'm just at a regular old state university in inland Southern California. Actually, most of our students are Hispanic, and I have yet to meet. This is going to, some other professors might be jealous that are listening to this. I really have yet to encounter what someone would call a social justice warrior or a woke student. Most of my students come to school. I teach them geology. I help them get jobs. They go out in the world. They want to be productive. They're good. They're great kids. I love my students. And I don't, again, that might be a function of the fact that I'm at a Hispanic institution, and most of the woke stuff comes out of upper class white kids, rich white kids from the Northeast. I don't know if that's true, and that could be it. But, and and I think most of the professors are great people. I like them. So I understand it. So if, on the other hand, shit is happening, right? There's real stuff happening around the country and around the world. I don't mean to discount that. I just want to say from my own personal experience, I think we're going to be okay. I think some people are starting to hit a wall. I think they're starting to understand intuitively that approaching everything from a social justice perspective is a low resolution way of seeing the world, and I think people want to be higher quality thinkers in that. And so, I think we're going to be okay. It may not feel like it. I don't know exactly how it's going to work in California. But remember, we've had 2 referenda so far about using race-based admission, and it was voted down twice. So that's in the California Constitution. So the voters certainly in California don't want to see everything through a racial lens, for example. So I think things are going to be okay. But part of that, and this is maybe just, I don't mean to bookend this like this, or maybe I do, I don't know. Part of that is definitely having professors criticize things when they see it. And I think nothing's going to happen if that must be part of the equation. Professors and students need to feel free to stand up in meetings and in the classroom and criticize things. And it's not even just, again, when I say criticize, I mean just have a conversation about things, or challenge people and do it in the way we would challenge any idea. So I'm hoping that's what. And there are groups around the country that are starting to help for faculty organize like that. There's one at MIT. There's one at Harvard now. I just did last month. I did a webinar with FIRE with the guy from Harvard, we talked about. I think we might do another one, actually, just explicitly only about how to organize faculty. But any professors that are listening to this, I would strongly encourage you to just say stuff. Maybe you're wrong, maybe you're not, but just sitting there quiet, even if you feel like you're the only person in the room, people need to know that there's not that ideas don't have unanimous support at the very least. You know what I mean? Maybe that doesn't do anything, but every bit helps. And this comes, and again, I also want to just say that I don't claim to have all the answers, right? I don't necessarily, maybe a social justice scholar would have a really good point about something, but we're not going to. The only way we're going to get to that is by having a conversation about it, where I can ask questions, right? And so, so.
Well, I mean, that's a good place to leave it. But I'm just going to add one thing, then I'll ask you to give everyone your contacts. But like what you mentioned there, like get the professors to stand up. I grew up in a Muslim household. I was raised as a Muslim and everything, and then now I'm an atheist. Now I technically have a death threat hanging over me. Like if I went to Saudi, if I went to Pakistan, like I think there's 13 countries that would kill me, right?
Wow.
No, I'm not saying this. I mean, Canada. I'm not worried about like I'm not saying this because but I'm like that's an actual fact. But like what I saw with a lot of people, you know, who had, you know, who had left Islam and stuff, and it takes a few to start speaking out, and then, you know, so yeah, a professor, you might, if you're not tenured, and even tenure now, it doesn't really offer much protection. You could face firing, you could face censure, you could face, you know, you're not going to get promoted, you're not going to get any funding, you know, like, you could face all these things. Like, I'm not denying, but your literal life isn't on the line. You
Right.
know, speak up. Like I said, you know, it's like Iron CLE said it after the Charlie Hebdo was killed. It's like everyone should share these pictures, like spread the risk, because, you know, they can't
Yes.
go after all of you. You know, so
Right.
like, you know, it's um you know, that's the one thing I'd add to that. Like, yeah, more professors should stand up. You know,
And it's actually ridiculous that more people learn if you disagree with something, you're not saying anything because we do have tenure. It's not that easy to get rid of someone with tenure. And if, especially if you're tenured, for God's sakes, just say what's on your mind. I think I said this to in the fire webinar we had. This is really silly, but I think this is true. If 18-year-old boys can storm the beach in Omaha, then a 45-year-old tenured professor surely can raise their hand and say they think it's a bad idea to, get rid of the GRE, right?
yeah,
So, or ask someone like, why does you think our department needs a DEI committee? Like, what's the reason for having a DEI committee? Why do we need it? And make people explain it. Maybe they have a reason for it. I don't know, but I feel like no one's ever asked to explain anything. So, like, just start there. So,
yep.
um, if I may, just can I just talk a little bit
Go
briefly
ahead,
about
talk.
our group?
Hmm.
So again, so what? And this is really a message. Again, I know you have a lot of professors out there that are listening. So I just want to tell a little bit about our story. We connected through publicly available lists, membership lists of the Heterodox Academy, for example. There's a lot of open letters that are out there, so you can find the names of people that are in your university on publicly available lists, because there's sort of an activation energy problem, right? If you feel like you're a dissident at the university, you don't really know where to go because you feel like you're in a minority, which you frankly probably are. So how do what are you going to do? Walk around with a sign and say, are there any other dissident professors here? So you have to contact people. And so I would advise people use these publicly available lists. One thing that our group is a little, and this was by design, which is that, we are in the California State University system. This is different from the University of California, by the way. Those are the research institutions, but our system is the teaching focused institution, the government college system in California. We have 23 campuses all over the state. We have about 500,000 students throughout the system, which makes us the largest 4-year university system in the United States. So what we're doing is we're leveraging the size of our system to get more people involved. And so we have 270 people that signed our open letter. And that number continues to grow. And what's nice about that is that once people are on our letter, they can find other people that are on their own campuses, right? So I'm at Cal State San Bernardino, and I think we got about 10 people on my campus that have signed the letter. And so I have doors to go knock on, right? And people to talk to. So we're building this network, and like, we're not all on the same campus, but we are all in the same system. We report to the same chancellor, and we all operate in basically the same system. So, there are a few things we can do. Like, this is an example of one thing that we're doing right now is we're putting together. We got about 7 or 8 of us that are going to we're going to draft a sort of a template to propose committees for academic freedom to our faculty senates. So a couple of our campuses have a faculty committee for academic freedom. And then we want to make sure every campus has a committee for academic freedom and expression too. And try to get one on every campus and get them all networked together so that we can talk to each other and help each other out when issues come up. And so Because one of the issues with all this stuff, and this is a very real issue that professors will appreciate, is that we're very busy. So how can we become involved in this yet do it in a way that makes sense for our careers, right?
Yeah.
The scholar activists, they've done this very brilliant move, which is that they've incorporated their activism into their actual scholarship. So when someone in a gender studies department goes up for tenure, they get to use their papers as scholarship, but it's also their activism, right? So in a geology, I can't do that with my research. So how do I figure out a way to sort of promote the ideas I want, yet be able to do something that I can present to the review committees when I go up for promotion, right? And so the answer is to develop committees on your campus, things like that. So we're trying to figure out ways to do that. So anyway, so I won't say much more about that, but I'm kind of rambling on about it.
Oh,
But I really
good.
want to encourage. I want to encourage faculty members to try to find each other. It's a wonderful experience. I promise you, to find someone where you can speak freely. You can say what you want to say. If you feel like you didn't have any friends before, it's a neat experience to find other faculty. I strongly encourage. I kind of joke that it's kind of like, I feel like finding dissident faculty on campus is kind of like being a gay man in the 1930s and moving to San Francisco. All of a sudden, you're surrounded by gay dudes. I feel like it's the same kind of thing, when you sort of organize a group of people, and next thing you know, you're on a Zoom call with 30 other people that are in your exact same position that are just like, why DEI is out of control,
Yeah.
and so anyway, it's a small part of the solution. I don't claim that we're going to change anything overnight, but I think having a group of people ready for action and ready is very helpful. And it definitely feels very good to meet people like that. I've met really wonderful people throughout our system, for sure. We have some great people.
Well, I mean, that's awesome. Like, again, that's kind of how like the ex-Muslim movements and stuff kind of started. They're just little small groups and it got bigger and bigger. But yeah, I mean, things will grow. Um, well, thank you very much for coming on, Cody. It was great talking to you. If you want to let people know where they can reach out to you, or like your Twitter handle or anything like that, I'll put that in the link in the description.
Okay. Yeah, I'm on Twitter mostly as an observer. Fire wrote a letter about our group in their news desk. So if you just search California State University faculty at thefire.org news desk, it'll show you a link. Okay, great.
But yeah, I mean, if you want to send me any links, I'll put them in the description.
Okay.
All right. Well, thank you again, and thanks everyone for listening.